Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on the park fire. I did some videos this morning covering this fire, but I was just looking at some of the live camera footage, some of the satellite imagery, the heat coming off of the fire, and realized that I really got to check up and see what's going on in this because it looks like, I would say, the most active wildfire that we've seen this entire year. It grew about 45,000 acres overnight last night. We stayed very warm and dry, and then we had strong southerly winds, and basically what that did is it took this fire that started kind of northeast of Chico, and those southerly winds pushed the fire through dry, abundant fuels, and we've just been hotter, drier, and windier this afternoon, so we're continuing to see a lot of the growth on the fire. Now this is actually the one that convinced me to get back on here. So this shows the burn, what you could now call the burn scar from the park fire. You can see where it started down here. You can tell which direction it's moving by the way the smoke is going. So last night and early this morning, most of our smoke was actually going up towards the north-northwest because the winds were coming from the south-southeast. But looking at the smoke right now, it actually looks like the wind direction has shifted slightly. And the areas of the fire that are the most active is where you see that orange kind of glowing. And it actually looks like there's almost two different fronts on this fire right now. At first it was kind of uniform on the northeastern section right here, but it looks like this southeastern section of the fire has started to become more active recently. And if you wait till the very end of this loop, I would say that's actually the most active part of the fire now, closer on the southeast. And the reason that's of concern is let's actually just check how close it is to some of the structures over here. So structures. Alright, so first disclaimer I'm going to say is the most accurate perimeter that we can use is a perimeter that they get with a flight. The second most accurate is going to be these stars. So the most accurate is going to be that yellow line that you see right there. This step down from that is going to be where you see those red stars. That's where we've had more recent heat detections. And then the least accurate one is going to be when it's basically current heat shown from the satellite. But this one almost always over-exaggerates how much the fire has grown, because a lot of the times it's picking up on some of the heat that's in the smoke plume, and I've seen that be off by as much as a mile before. So just because that's where it shows the heat detections at the moment doesn't mean that's actually how far the fire has gone, but I do like to click on that because it does give us a general idea of where we are seeing the most heat coming off of the fire, and kind of goes along with the satellite imagery right there with the orange glow at the top and then the orange glow on the southeastern side, where it looks like there's almost two different sections of the fire. Now I'm going to turn off those current ones. We'll go back to just the modus and veers right here, because this will be slightly more accurate than that. Let's try to turn on structures here. Now again, this doesn't mean that anywhere where you've seen the fire perimeter or current heat detections over structures, that doesn't mean that the fire has moved over those areas, because within the fire perimeter itself you can have areas where there's low severity burning, high severity burning, maybe even some unburned islands. But again, this is just the best information that we have to go off of. So right on that eastern side of the fire, it does look like we have a large number of structures right there. Now in the most recent fire perimeter, it looks like they were able to stop the fire before those structures. So let's hope that it's continued to hold right there, but we certainly do have... I wonder if that's why the fire split in two. I wonder if they just had a ton of aircraft on this fire. We've been watching all the aircraft basically all day long today. It's the most... I'd say it's the largest operations I've ever seen on a fire before. And what I'm wondering is, because we have all of those structures right there, if they were just dumping massive amounts of retardant right there, and they were able to stop the fire enough that it then split in two, where some of it went off to the north, and then some of it remained active to the south. Now you can also see that we do have also a large amount of structures to the east of this fire, and the reason that's a bit concerning is because we are seeing the smoke turn around a little bit. So instead of going up towards the north-northwest, it's going more northeasterly and then even shifting a bit more easterly recently. So that means that's going to be generally the direction that the fire starts to move as the winds push it forward. So let's actually put a name to some of these structures that we're seeing all around the fire. So we'll come over to Google Earth, and hopefully this is working quickly enough. One thing I'll say is the orange is going to be last 12 to 24 hours. So that's going to be a lot of our growth that happened overnight when it went from what you could call an arson fire. Apparently this fire started because somebody lit a car on fire, pushed it off a cliff, and then it started a fire. And then we remained warm, dry, and windy last night. I checked one weather station on the ground, and it was showing 78 degrees at midnight last night, relative humidity around 35%, and then wind gusts around 28 miles per hour. So basically took that fire that started with a burning car and pushed it up towards the north, and that was the orange color that you see there, mostly overnight growth. Then it almost seemed like the winds calmed down slightly this morning, and then they really started to pick back up again this afternoon. And that's going to be a lot of the red that you see on this map. Once again, heat detections, it doesn't mean that that's the current fire perimeter, but it's the best information that we have to go off of. And the other thing I should mention is these heat detections, I believe I did the time conversion on them, and it was showing that they're from around 2 p.m. this afternoon. So if you're a local, also know that this may be overestimating fire growth, but it also might be underestimating it. So if you're under an evacuation warning or order, I would definitely say to take those seriously. But now with all the disclaimers out of the way, let's just try to figure out kind of where the most recent information is that we have to go off of. So you see Chico down here. So it started off towards the northeast of Chico. And then let's check out this southeastern side of the fire first, because that's actually the side of the fire we've seen has been more active recently. I did see one report on Twitter where they said the fire was pushing towards Forest Ranch. You can see Forest Ranch on the map right there. Then we have Helltown, Centerville, and then I heard a number of people mentioning Paradise as well. So let's find Paradise on this map. You see Paradise down here, Magalia right here. So looks like we do still have some distance between those areas and where, you know, the most recent heat detections that I have to go off of are coming from. Let's actually measure that. Paradise to, let's go to that red square. That's showing 5.5 miles right there. And then what about, all right, let's try from Magalia here. That's showing about 8 miles right there. So that's still a good amount of distance, although when we go back to the satellite imagery, it is that eastern side of the fire. Watch how much it flares up just in the last few hours. So let's actually check out some different sky cams here, see if we can see what this fire actually looks like, also get an idea of what kind of conditions we're dealing with. First thing I notice, how much rising motion you have. This is where your fire is going to actually start creating its own weather, where you get a lot of burning, that creates a lot of heat. That heat warms up the air, that warm air is going to become less dense, it rises up, and then you get air rushing in from different directions to basically kind of take the place of the air that's rising, and then that can lead to even faster growth. It can also lead to some spot fires. So that's one view right there. Now let's check out another one. Looks like, yeah, there's abundant fuels in this area. And then the last weather forecast that I looked at was saying it was going to be around 97 degrees this afternoon, relative humidity dropping into the teens, and wind gusts over 25 miles per hour. And one way that you know it's windy out there is just how fast that smoke appears to be moving. Obviously, this is a time lapse, but it's also bent over. So that's also an indication that we have some windy conditions out there. Looks like a lot of grass, a lot of brush. It's a big part of, see a little pyrocumulus starting to pop up at the top there. Let's reload this one and see if that pyrocumulus has continued the last hour. So that's one thing that the wet winter actually is kind of working against us, where we had a bunch of more grass grow, and then that grass dries out very quickly. We had a heat wave at the beginning of July, which dried out a lot of our fuels, about as dry as you'll ever see them this time of the year. And then on top of that, let's check out this camera. On top of that, we're also above average the last few days, so it's even more drying took place there. So this one, I should probably try to show on the map where this is that we're looking at. So it's right there. That's going to be, see Chico right here, Paradise right here. This camera, it says Doe Mill Road. So, and then that's going to be looking up this direction. So now let's check out Doe Mill Road. This is the last, wow. Starting to even see a little rotation on it right there. So that's where you get the rising motion. And then you get air rushing in from different directions at different speeds. So then that's where it starts to rotate. Let's check out the 3-hour time lapse on this. I'm sorry if I'm losing my voice a bit. I had that morning shift today, so I've been up since about 3 a.m. in the morning, pretty much nonstop talking all day long. But looking at it, you can see how it just starts to rip through these fuels right here. And, it doesn't actually look like topography is a huge part of what's going on. More looks like it's wind and fuel is what's driving this fire. Now watch as you see this plume come up right here and then actually start to rotate as it's moving through. I would say that's the scariest camera that we've seen so far. And let's see, if Chico's there, Paradise is there, our camera was there. I would imagine it's looking at that portion of the fire. So, and then if we tie that in with the winds, see the winds going up towards the northeast. Might even see that little white burst right here. That might even be some of that pyrocumulus that we're starting to see on that kind of rotating plume right there. So right there, I believe that matches up with maybe that corner of the fire right there. So that kind of makes me concerned about these structures that we have in this area, because earlier, if we just go perimeters only, earlier it looked like the perimeter bumped up right to these structures, and that like right there, you would call that a success mission right there. But when we look at the current heat detections and match that up with the satellite imagery, if those structures are right in there, then we're starting to see this now southern edge of the fire push closer towards those structures. So, I mean, that's kind of a hard thing to say, but I don't kind of hold back from saying that just in case there's anybody in that area who happens to be watching this live stream who hasn't evacuated yet. I would definitely evacuate right now. If you are anywhere, if you go to watch duty, anywhere in this red is going to be where you have an evacuation order. That means leave immediately. Anywhere in the yellow is going to be an evacuation warning, which means kind of get ready to evacuate. And I'm interested to see. So it actually does look like there's some parts of Paradise that are now in the evacuation warnings, which is the yellow. And then the red extends. Looks like Helltown right there, Centerville right there is in the evacuation warning. And then, although I probably shouldn't go through the evacuation warnings and orders just because some people might be watching this video at a later point in time. So if you are watching this later, these might have changed. So definitely stay updated with the most recent information that you have. So let's try to figure out what those structures are right there. So I believe if we look at the fire, Google Earth, so slow today. I think it's because it's trying to load the new heat detection data right here. But, I mean, if we're just going off of it, it looks like it's, hopefully I'm saying it right, Cohasset, right there. You can tell that I'm from the Central Coast. I believe that's going to be, let's see if we can, Caltopo, I don't think has any of the maps that have the names on them. See if we can zoom in here. It would be helpful if the Watch Duty app had the cities. Maybe we can change to satellite? Ah, there we go. Alright, that's a much better map to be working with. So there you see Cohasset. I believe that is the structures that we're worried about right there. Where in the past, looks like the perimeter bumps up to those structures, but now it looks like the most active part of the fire is this southeastern portion right there. And then if we look at the wind plot, so I think this forecast is actually wrong now because it doesn't look like we have southerly winds anymore. It actually looks like it's more a southwesterly wind, which is pushing the fire almost this direction right here. And the way we can kind of back that up is by looking at the satellite imagery. Look at the way the smoke is moving. And I mean, watch how this fire does split in two. So perhaps Cohasset's like right in there where we see all those structures, and maybe the top end of this fire moves just to the north of it, and then the bottom edge of this fire moves just to the southeast of it. All right, I see somebody in the live chat did a pronunciation. Cohasset. Oh, let me know if I'm saying that correctly now. And somebody said this thing will run through Lassen to the Dixie Fire burn scar. So let's actually check out some burn scars. That's something that we haven't done yet, but is definitely important. So that is one alarming part about this fire, and is a big part of the reason that we're seeing as much growth as we are seeing on it, is up on the north side, we have the 2013 Deer Fire, but that doesn't seem to be stopping it at all. It seems like, based on that perimeter right there, rushing right through it, we must have had enough fuel regrow since 2013 that basically there's still plenty of fuel. And if we look at the northern side of the fire here, see how much orange is right there? That's just ripping through what we would hope would have been a burn scar that would help stop this fire. But yeah, it doesn't seem like that's working to our favor. What's more concerning though is if you look all around the northeastern side and the eastern side of this fire, there is no recent fire history. So right now I'm just doing fire history from 2000 to the present, because honestly, if you have a burn scar that's more than 24 years old, it's probably not going to help you out that much anyway. But the fact that all of this is fuels that haven't burned in over 2 decades, it's kind of the explainer for why we have seen as much growth as we have. And I just want to reload this camera because so again, that's the camera showing on map. Here's Chico, here's Paradise. Let's see if we can zoom in here actually. So that's going to be looking up towards Deer Creek Highway, 32 right there. I wonder if we can see 32 on the watch duty app. So there's 32 right there. Let's try to kind of match these two maps up with each other. So there's Chico. There's Paradise. And then there's 32. So looking here, zooming out, we've got Chico, Paradise, looking up towards 32. So I believe that's going to be that little tip of the fire right there. And you can see how active it's been. It kind of matches up with what we're seeing on this camera. Let's look at the last, let's go 1 hour, where it's certainly moving quickly. And I would say that's the most active wildfire that I've seen this entire year, and even a little rotation aspect too. So now looks like somebody says parts of 32 have already been so somebody said parts of 32 already have the fire over it. Maybe that's that southern edge of the fire right here. Looks like it's maybe slopped over a little bit right there, and maybe that's why they have, look, 2 helicopters and a plane hitting that side of the fire right now. You can actually see the different pathways that they're doing. Looks like they're maybe getting some kind of water around here and then dumping it right there to try to stop it. So that's just based on the fact that we can see those flight paths right there, tells us that that's probably about as far as it's gone on the southern edge of this fire. And then anywhere in the red right there, that's going to be your evacuation orders. Looks like we have this plane about to come in right here. Let's see what loop he just did. So I wonder if he came around right here, maybe dropped some retardant right there. Hopefully that doesn't mean that the fire has burned all the way to that point just yet. And then zooming into here, that's where we see Coasset. Now on the western side of that fire, it did seem like they were able to stop it before those structures. But now we're just concerned about it coming up maybe on the eastern side, because it does look like it's split in two right here, and the northern half is now basically going off into the wilderness where you don't see as many structures up here. So I would say this northern side of the fire, watch it split in two right here. The northern side of the fire is probably where we're going to see more growth over the next 24 hours, because there's a lot of fuel in this area that hasn't burned in decades, and there's also not as many structures. So I would imagine that they are getting as many resources as they can to try to protect these communities to the east of the park fire. Now, if you're living in Chico, you might be wondering why I haven't been talking all that much about Chico when the fire is that close to thousands of structures down here. And the reason is because when we look at the burns, it's weird calling it a burn scar when the fire is still burning. But where you see that black is the fire. And then where you see the orange is where it's been more active recently. And where you see the smoke is, you could kind of view that as almost like arrows pointing out the direction that the fire is going. So you can see that the fire is going away from Chico. Chico is going to be down here. So as long as we don't see any wind shift, Chico should be in the clear. But then it's those areas to the east and the northeast of the fire that are of the most concern. Now, doesn't look like there's much up to the northeast in this direction, but it does look like there's a large amount on the eastern side of this fire, and it's that southeastern edge that you notice becomes a lot more active in the last hour or two. So coming back in here, that explains, oh wow, that actually just all perfectly tied together, where you look at this northern side of the fire, you're not seeing all that much aircraft going on. And then you look at the southern fire, and it's just swarming with aircraft down here. And then the evacuation orders do continue up towards the northern side of the fire. So I don't want to say that the northern side of the fire isn't important because you can see some orange dots up there. There are certainly some structures. There's just a much larger amount to the east. Yeah, to the east of this fire. So now we've been talking a lot about the weather, but I haven't actually checked what the weather has been doing. So let's actually see what we're dealing with on the ground here. We're going to go in, look at some of the weather observations. So here's Chico. We got Chico, Paradise. It seems like the most active part of the fire, there's Forest Ranch. Let's find that on the Watch Duty app. That's maybe hard to find there, but we can go over to Google Earth, which is deciding to be slow once again. You know what? I might even just close out of Google Earth. It has been failing me. Yeah, you know what? Quitting out of that. Alright, so coming back here, let's check out the weather observations. This one is going to be Forest Ranch. Max temperature today, 93 degrees. Notice the minimum temperature, though, 76 degrees. So that's why this fire was able to grow more than 45,000 acres overnight last night, is we didn't cool off very much last night. And then you see max RH, 40%. So instead of having a bunch of moisture move in overnight, it just stayed dry. So then that allowed very active fire behavior during the overnight hours. And then minimum RH, 15%. That's about as... No, sometimes we see it in the single digits, but anytime your minimum RH is in the teens, you're going to have very active fire behavior, especially when you combine that with an area that hasn't seen any fires recently, has a large amount of fuel that hasn't been burned in decades, and then on top of that, we had a heat wave at the beginning of July, which dried out all the fuels after a wet winter, which brought in a lot more grasses. So then the fire is able to quickly spread through the grasses, goes into the brush, and then into trees as well. You have those continuous ladder fuels, and that's why it's such a big deal when you don't have a lot of fire history in an area, is because then you end up with continuous fuels. And then once a fire develops, let's maybe go the 3-hour time lapse on this now. Once a fire develops, and then you get some hot, dry conditions with southerly winds blowing at about 25 miles per hour during the overnight hours, it's able to quickly spread. Then you get into the peak of the afternoon where you're now in the mid-90s with relative humidity as dry as you're ever really going to see. That's where you end up with just a massive rotating column like what we're seeing right there. So coming back here, interesting that it shows max gust 14 miles per hour. So that would tell you, based on that one, it doesn't seem like it's been that windy. But that's also the Forest Ranch observation right there. If we click right here, that one shows a max gust around 21 miles per hour, 94 max temperature, and minimum RH around 14%. And then that might be right in the fire. That's going to be about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, max gust 24 miles per hour. What I'm interested to see is if the winds are moving in the right direction. So as in getting calmer. So yeah, it looks like it's been fairly consistent, about 15 to 20 miles per hour since about 10:30 this morning. We have had those strong gusts. And it looks like it's not really letting up. Notice the direction seems to have changed, though. Around 10 a.m., we have a straight southerly wind there. And then now it's a bit more south-southwest. So south-southwest goes along with what we're seeing in the direction that the smoke is going. The smoke is going towards the northeast. And then, just in case you're new to the live stream, maybe I should just do kind of a refresher of some of the information that we've been able to figure out so far. I'm going to take a quick sip of water first. Maybe I'll make a practice of doing this every 30 minutes. Started at 5 o'clock, 30 minutes in, we'll do a little update here. So here is the park fire. We can actually see if there's been any updates. Looks like there was one 21 minutes ago. It says the fire is spotted across Highway 32 near Woodland Park Drive per radio traffic. 10 additional strike teams of engines, 50 engines, any type requested to the Forest Ranch area. So that was actually something that we were just looking at, was the Forest Ranch area. And we were also just looking at Highway 32 as well. So coming into watch duty. Yeah, we'll get into the details in just a moment. I'll just try to continue the refresher. So basically, park fire started yesterday. Car on fire and pushed it off a cliff into some fuels. And then last night, it remained warm and dry overnight. We remained in the 70s with relative humidity in the 30% range. But the biggest factor is we had strong southerly winds, which quickly pushed this fire towards the north. We grew over 40,000 acres last night. And then throughout the day today, it's even hotter, drier, and windier than last night. So we're seeing very active behavior. And just to illustrate that, we can look at what it's looked like over the last 3 hours. This is showing the map. This is from Chico. Over here, Paradise right here. There's Doe Mill Road. It's going to be looking up at the fire this direction. And then let's check out the last 3 hours. So as those southerly winds have pushed the fire through these dry fuels, you're going to see it really pick up in activity, especially as we get into the peak of the afternoon when it's going to be the hottest, driest, windiest part of the day. One concerning thing that I haven't talked about yet is the fact that tomorrow afternoon is supposed to be even windier than this afternoon. So when it comes to the weather forecast, big challenge right there. And we'll just think about the fire behavior triangle. Fuel, weather, topography. So weather is working against us. It's about as hot as you could expect it to be. Mid-90s, even some triple digits out there. Relative humidity is about as dry as you're ever going to see it, in the teens, which dries out the fuels, which makes it easier for the fire to spread, because instead of the fire having to waste some of its energy evaporating the moisture out of the fuels, what happens is the fuels are already dry. The fire, right when it gets to those fuels, they're just ready to combust. So it's hot, it's dry. Winds, I would say, have actually been the biggest factor on this fire. And you can see just based on the direction that it's gone. When we had those south-southeasterly winds overnight, it was pushing it up towards the north-northwest. And then now that the winds have shifted around a bit more to the south, from the south-southwest, now we're seeing more of that growth kind of pushing up towards the northeast. Now, one thing that I want to point out on this graphic right here is, at first it looked like the fire was just moving all forward in one big wave, but now it seems like the fire is split into almost two different fires. We have one on the north that's basically going up into the wilderness, where we don't have as many structures up there. We also don't have any recent burn scars, which means there's a lot of fuel in here that hasn't burnt out in decades, which means that fire is just going to continue to rip to the north. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of room to run up towards the north. So that's the northern side of the fire. And then we also have this southern edge of the fire, which is, I would say, the part of the fire that I'm more concerned about right now. And the reason I'm more concerned about that one, oh, interesting, somebody just put in the live chat, Acreage just got updated. Let's see if it's on the Watch Duty app. Oh, that one's still showing 71,000. Let's see if it's on CAL FIRE. Somebody in the live chat just said it got bumped up to 120,000. Yep, you can see it on CAL FIRE's website, up to 120,000. And keep in mind, let's go to Watch Duty. This started at around 3 p.m. yesterday, and it's now 5:30. So in, what is that, 26 hours roughly? I've been up since 3 in the morning. It's hard for me to do mental math at this point, but in, let's call it one day, it grew more than 100,000 acres, which is just absurd. A fire was active if it burned maybe 2,000 to 3,000 acres in a day. I would call it large to even extreme fire growth if you have 10,000 acres in a day. So the fact that this one burned 120,000 acres in a day is just kind of, it shows what kind of conditions we're dealing with in California right now. Just with the confluence of all sorts of different factors. We've had, you look at one of these cameras, look how much fuel is out there. That's fuel that hasn't burnt in decades. And then on top of that, we had a heat wave at the beginning of July, dried everything out. And then we also obviously love to live in California. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to live. But then what happens is, if you're in the wildland-urban interface, this ecosystem in California that naturally knows fires, and actually a lot of the ecosystems in California require fires in order to be healthy, but obviously that it combats with our interest when we have structures and life and property that can get in the way of these fires sometimes. So just going back to Cal Fire, I want to see how many more resources they have on this fire, because I looked earlier today. Oh wow. So in one day, they've been able to get over 1,000 personnel on this fire. Shows 6 helicopters, but it seems like we have more than that. 153 engines, 41 dozers, 40 crews. And keep in mind that all of that has been able to mobilize in one day. And then if we look at the Watch Duty app, you can see how much aircraft is on this fire right now. I've never seen a fire like that before. Also notice that they're mostly focused on the southern edge of the fire, and that goes along with what we were just talking about, how the northern edge doesn't have as many structures up here. So it seems like at this point, you'd like to be able to stop both sides of the fire, but you have to kind of make priority calls. There's no solutions, only trade-offs, and it seems like they're definitely focusing on this southerly edge at the moment. Now it is interesting, if we zoom into here, that's Coasset. Again, probably pronouncing that wrong, my apologies. Just because you see that red over Coasset doesn't mean that it's actually moved over all of those structures. Actually, the most recent perimeter data that we have to go off of says that it's not over those structures yet. And that would maybe mean that they put in some good lines there and they were actually able to steer the fire up towards the north. And maybe that's actually the reason that the fire split in two, is because they have all these structures in there and then they basically kind of bent it around those structures, and then half of the fire took off to the north, and then the other half of the fire is now picking up. Cohasset. Cohasset? I'm going to just have to wait till I hear somebody else say it. So that's southeastern edge of the fire. Definitely looks to be the more active part. And then when we zoom in down here, now let's kind of clean up this map a little bit. Let's turn off fire history. Let's maybe keep the structures on, because it's kind of our big concern right now. Now let's throw the modus and veers back on it. And it's hard to, it's hard to tell exactly what kind of information we can pull from these red dots. What that's basically saying is that's where the fire has been more active recently, but it's also sort of an estimate, so you can't say exactly where it is at the moment. I'd imagine what they're trying to do would be to steer it around this group of structures right here, maybe through that path, because it doesn't seem like they're just going to be able to stop it in its tracks. I mean, you look at how fast this fire appears to be moving, how much power it has, also how much smoke it has in front of the fire. You can imagine what that does to the aircraft. If your fire is moving like that, it's pretty hard to drop anything in front of that because you'd have very low visibility because the winds are pushing the smoke in the same direction that the fire is moving. So if you're trying to drop some fire retardant down and stop the fire, well, you have to be able to see in order to do that. So that could be part of the explanation why it seemed like all of the aircraft seemed to be focusing on this southern edge of the fire right here. But it does look like some of their tracks do actually start to move up a bit higher towards the southeast on this fire. So coming back to our satellite imagery, there's the south end right there. Seems like it's basically where my red circle is right now, is where they're focusing a lot of the aircraft right now. And then it seems like it's kind of between these two fires where we have a large amount of structures right there, and then there's more structures in places like Paradise, but we have a bit more distance between the fire and Paradise. Now with that being said, we are now seeing the evacuation warnings going into Paradise. Oh, interesting. So somebody in the live chat just says they seem to be focused along Highway 32, lots of homes about to be overrun. So let's just see where Highway 32 is in relation to this map. So it seems like, you look at these flight tracks, seems like they're still doing a lot of drops on the western side of Highway 32 right there. Like, I think I would be maybe even more concerned if they were doing more drops on the eastern side, because that would mean it's already crossed, although we have seen some reports that it has already crossed Highway 32 in some places. But it's, I mean, based on all of these flight paths, you look at every single one of them, it seems to be dropping right about there, and it's on the western side of Highway 32. And keep in mind that the flight tracker is going to be more accurate than those orange kind of heat detections that we're seeing right there. Although if we zoom in, yeah, it looks like that perimeter goes right up against 32. So looking at it, I mean, I'm not seeing a place that it's actually gone over Highway 32 just yet. But, I mean, we did hear some reports of people saying that it has. And if it has, it was most likely right there to the east of Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve, or down here by Deer Creek Highway, which is 32. So that seems to be where the fight is right now. Interesting. So somebody said there was a corner burned over and then they dropped on it. So that would maybe make sense, kind of piecing it all together. If it maybe went over 32 at one point, they did a bunch of drops on it, they brought it back on the western side of 32, and then now their main focus is basically keeping it on the western side of 32 right here. I think, yeah, that's a good piece of information that we just figured out. So thank you to everybody who's talking in the live chat. We're kind of a team trying to figure out what's going on the park fire right now. So, yeah, so Rob says it did jump 32 and they hit it with 2 retardant drops. And then people are also talking about some of the evacuation warnings and orders. Yeah, anywhere where you see red, that means there's an order. That means basically leave immediately. Anywhere where you see yellow, that means a warning. That means basically get ready to leave. And Something I maybe should say about the orders is you do want to take those seriously because, if your goal is for your property to be saved, and, it's not just a property, that can be a lifetime of memories at that place, and so of course you'd want it to be saved, but a lot of times there's actually a better chance of it being saved if you do evacuate, because then if they get crews in there to try to do structure defense, then they don't have to worry about evacuating people, then they can just worry about protecting those structures. So it actually does kind of help you and your community as well, just to take those evacuation orders seriously when you get them, and then when you have a warning, definitely getting ready. And something I also say is, just because there's evacuation warning doesn't mean you can't already evacuate. Sometimes it is good to just play it safe, get out of there before everybody's trying to get out of there, because that's when things can get a bit more crowded. So, and if you get a feeling in your gut that it's time to leave, then you should leave. And then somebody says it's the very edge of Magalia asked to evacuate, not the whole town. And I want to see if the wind is shifting direction, because, based on this imagery, it's certainly shifted direction since last night. Last night it was coming from the south-southwest, and that's why the fire moved very quickly up towards the north-northwest. Now that the smoke is blowing, it almost seems directly to the northeast. It seems like our winds are coming from the southwest, and I'm interested to see if they're expected to continue to do that, because that's kind of the most important information that we can gather here, because the direction of your winds overnight, that's basically going to determine the direction of your fire spread from here on out. So, something we can do, we'll just zoom in up to Chico. Let's see if we can pick a spot. Maybe we'll just go right on 32. This seems to be right where the fire is at the moment. So this is where I think the weather forecast was maybe a little bit wrong. The weather forecast is showing southerly winds right here, and even almost going up towards the north-northwest, almost like they were last night. But if you look at the wind coming off of this fire, that's not a southeasterly wind. That's coming it almost looks like straight from the southwest. So maybe that's one disclaimer as we look at this weather forecast, is it doesn't exactly look like it's right now. So I don't know how much we can trust it in the future. Although maybe it is kind of in this zone right here where you do start to see the winds shift a little bit, where on this side it seems like it's going more towards the northwest. But then you look over here, it does look like the model has it going a bit more towards the northeast. So yeah, it's the best information that we have to go with. One thing I'm interested to see is if the winds are going to calm down overnight, or if it's going to be like last night and they're just going to stay strong. So that's now clicking into 11 p.m. and it does still look like we have gusty winds. But notice overnight the model has it turning a lot more southeasterly. So that would be good news for Paradise and Magalia. Again, hopefully pronouncing that one right. Need to work on all my pronunciations. Need to travel more. That would be good news for those communities, because a southeasterly wind would basically push the fire back into itself on this southeastern side. Because you let's look at where those red dots are right there. That seems to be the most active part of the fire at the moment. If we get that southeasterly wind, which is a different direction wind than it appears that we have right now. So this might actually, instead of me saying all these directions, it might be easier if I were to actually draw. So right now, the wind looks to be going that direction. And we looked at the model, and the bad news is that the model shows that it's going to remain windy overnight. But the good news is that the model says it's going to be going this direction overnight. So that would take that hot spot and basically push it back into the part of the fire that's already been burned. So then there's not going to be any fuel for it to consume. So then that would actually help decrease the fire activity. I mean, that's what I'm hoping for right there, is that shift in wind direction overnight ends up helping us. But the fact that it stays windy overnight is definitely concerning. Now, it does look like the winds calm down tomorrow morning. That's something that seemed to happen today as well. But then as we get into tomorrow afternoon, this is where the bad news comes back in. It looks like a very similar wind direction to what we had today, but actually even windier than what we had today. So, just getting back to the fire here. It looks like it's basically split in two. We have this northern side and the southern side. The northern side is burning off into fuels that, based on the fire history, haven't been burned in decades. Actually, that's pretty much the entire perimeter of this fire. But you're not seeing as many of these orange dots. See me clicking those on and off. Those represent all of the structures that we have. So, but then you see a lot of those orange dots on this eastern side of the fire. So you have that northern edge. That's definitely going to continue burning. And we have seen an update with our acreage. It's now up to, 120,000 acres is the most recent update. And this southeastern side of the fire seems to be just getting more and more active. Like, if you look at this thing, automatically updates, and if you look at the last 30 minutes to the last hour, that's the most heat we've seen coming off of the southeastern side of the fire, I think, all day long. So that's very concerning for all of those structures that we have right in there. Because it seems like the perimeter stops before those structures. And then you can imagine that northern part of the fire is now just burning off into the wilderness. And maybe they're able to just perfectly steer it around. But right when there's like a saying where it's like out of the frying pan and into the fryer or something. It's like that edge of the fire pushed up against these structures, and then they're able to steer it off towards the north. But then right when you think you're in the clear, the southern edge starts to become more active. And based on the southerly wind, that's going to try to push the fire up towards the north. So that's, I would say, all bad news based on where the fire seems to be the most active, right there, where we have the largest amount of structures right there, and the wind direction, which is southerly, which is going to try to push this fire towards the north. Now, if we want to try to look for some good news, it's that almost all of the aircraft that we can see, let's see where this one went. Okay, so those two are now starting to focus a bit more towards the north than this huge collection of aircraft down on the southern edge of the fire. I was going to say that the silver lining is that it seems like a lot of the aircraft that we're seeing are still mostly focused on keeping it to the west of 32, down on this southern edge of the fire. And it doesn't seem like we have as much aircraft up where we have that large amount of structures that seem to dodge the first bullet, but now seems to have another bullet coming towards them. And those ones, yeah, there are some planes that have been maybe taking more of a northerly route recently. It seemed like when we were looking at this originally, all of them were just focused right here. Now it does seem like they're spreading out a bit more to the north. But one challenge that we also talked about is when you have all of this smoke blowing and you have that strong breeze blowing the smoke, a lot of times maybe the reason they'd be focusing on the southern edge is because it's actually so smoky up here that they can't get in there to drop any retardant. So that could also be a possibility of what's going on. So I think we've gotten about, let's maybe check out if there's some other cameras here. So that one was Doe Mill Road. That one's from Chico, Paradise, looking up at the fire that way. Let's check out, so those ones seem to be farther away from the fire. Maybe go Bald Mountain. So that's now going to be looking at actually from a different direction. So there's the one we were just looking at. It's going to be looking up that way. Now Bald Mountain is going to be looking kind of more westerly towards the fire. And let's see what this one has looked like over the last 3 hours. So right off the bat, first thing that I noticed, a lot of fuel. Oh, interesting. All right, so this might, I can't confirm this, but this might actually show kind of the two different fires that we seem to be having going on. Where there's northern side, southern side. I wonder if this camera is far enough away that it's actually able to pick up on both of those. But that might just be a little trick of the camera right there. It seems like maybe it's just looking at that southern edge of the fire now that I think about it. But pretty incredible how much smoke is coming off of it. It almost seems like it calms down a little bit right there. Hopefully that was the case. But then that southern edge really starts to pick up. And then look how much rising motion you have. It's actually starting to rotate a bit as well. Wow. Especially towards the end there. Let's look at last hour. So I'd say this is definitely the most active fire behavior that we've seen this entire year. You know, let's check Twitter, see if, or X I should say, see if we have any recent information here. Let's go latest. Yeah, somebody commented on the mesovortex. I don't know if I'd call it a mesovortex, but I'd call it a rotating smoke plume. And then just trying to look and see if anybody has commented on maybe where it's jumped over. Oh, somebody posted one of the more recent perimeter maps. So yeah, that's kind of the same one that we've sort of been working off as well. So no real new information there. And then yeah, it seems like, oh wow, what camera is that one? All right, let's see. That one is going to be something, maybe Butte Mountain 1. Show on map. Oh, Bald Mountain. Bald Mountain 1. Let's see, 1 hour ago. No, that's not really showing us anything. Oh, there it is. Plaid Mountain 1. Okay, get ready. I think this is going to be probably... So you see the trees moving. That shows us that there's some windy conditions out there. We've seen that. Some gusts around 20 to 25 miles per hour. Temperatures around 95. Does look like topography is a factor. And we'll start to see a little rotation on that smoke plume towards the end there. Yeah, I see somebody in the live chat just said Plaid Mountain 1. Let's just look at that one more time. Just trying to get some visuals on what's going on here. I mean, basically when you look, the reason looking at these visuals is useful is because it gives you an idea of how much energy and power is coming off of this fire right now. And I mean, just based on that, this fire is pretty much going to do what it wants to do. If it wants to keep going towards the north, it seems like it is going to keep going towards the north. And maybe that is why they seem to just be focused on the southern edge so much, as maybe that's just the only place that they have a hope of stopping it right now. Although, I mean, looking at these, it does look like we have more of our aircraft starting to come up farther north. So that is definitely a change from what we were seeing recently when they're all concentrated on the south. Alright, so it's been another 30 minutes, so maybe I'll just do the update of the information that we've been able to try to figure out. Oh, we got another very large air tanker coming in, so that's good news. I'm actually interested to see where that one ends up dropping. Yeah, it's been another 30 minutes though, so I'll try to do the update on everything we've learned. Maybe before I do that, if I can click in here, new evacuation orders, new evacuation warnings. Those are definitely the main thing that you should focus on if you're a local. If you are under an order and you haven't evacuated yet, definitely do that. But acreage, we saw that bump up to 120,000 acres. Keep in mind, that's in about 1 day. So, I mean, you'd call it large extreme fire growth if you had 10,000 acres over 24 hours. We had over 120,000 acres and counting. We're going to see more continue to burn. This is the update that we're looking for right here. So the fire has been mapped at 120,000 acres by Fires Intel aircraft. Their perimeter can be viewed on the watch duty map. Air attack reporting the fire is continuing to come out of Big Chico Creek and running into the Woodland Park Drive and Crown Point areas. It is holding north of Highway 32. They're working on getting aircraft in there. And then fire perimeter advisement, I put the same thing in the description of my videos, that, you know, just because the fire perimeter goes up to a certain area doesn't mean everything has burned within that, but it also doesn't mean that that's where the fire is right now. It may have continued to spread. So you can't really look at a perimeter and think, oh, we're good. It's still a decent amount away from us, because obviously the fire, as we've seen on some of these live cameras, is moving quite rapidly. And, you know, one thing we could do is actually measure how far this fire has gone in 1 day. And we'll just keep it on the perimeter, even though we probably could extend it even further than that. Wow. That is showing 20 miles of growth in 1 day. So that's, I mean, I've been doing these wildfire forecasts for about 5 years now. And that's the most growth I've ever seen on a fire. I think the previous record was held by, at least in my own forecasting experience, was the Dixie Fire, which 1 day it was able to hop over some containment lines and some fuel breaks, and then it took off 15 miles in 1 day. But it looks like this one has now gone 20 miles in 1 day. And a big part of the reason for that, just continuing our basic summary of what's going on here, is look in this area, there's no fire history. And even where we did have some fire history, the 2013 Deer Fire, it seems like the fire is just running right through that. So we must have had enough fuel that's grown in the last 11 years to sustain growth on that northern edge. And then on this southeastern edge, that's where we just have a massive amount of fuels that haven't burnt in decades. And then you mix that with, you know, in here we were seeing some topographic influence, where you maybe get some fire at maybe the bottom of this little canyon right here, and then it likes to rip up the hill. And then in canyons, you also get kind of weird wind flow, and when you have that much rising motion, you do have a lot of air rushing in from different directions, and if it comes in at different speeds, that's where you start to get some of that rotation that we're seeing right there. So topography is a factor, fuels are a factor. I mean, just look at that camera right there. That's about as dense as your fuels could possibly be. and they've been there for decades. And then on top of that, weather. We looked at the weather. Some of these stations showing triple-digit temperatures today, about as hot as you could ever expect it to be. Minimum relative humidity, 13%, about as dry as you could expect to be. And then max wind gusts, 24 miles per hour there, but I've seen some gusts around 28 miles per hour. So basically checking every single box possible that would lead to active fire growth on the park fire here. And then I think the most useful imagery that we've actually had to go off of is the satellite imagery that shows the fire detections, where that dark color is going to be your burn scar. The orange is going to be where there's the most heat coming off of the fire right now. And then I'll just turn on, let's clean this map up a little bit. We'll just look at the perimeter first. That cluster of structures, Cohasset, definitely still saying that wrong, but I believe that's what we're looking at right there. Originally, it looks like the fire perimeter goes right up against these structures, and perhaps that's actually the reason that this fire split in two, is they put in a bunch of good work right there and basically bent the fire around those structures, and then it continued to take off to the north. But the biggest concern right now is now the most active part of the fire looks to be this southeastern edge right here. And the way we know that is looking at this imagery right here. Imagine those structures somewhere tucked around right in there. And then this southeastern edge of the fire now becoming a lot more active. And another reason this one is useful to us is when we're looking at the wind models are saying it's just still a southerly wind. But if you look at the direction the smoke is actually going, it looks like the wind is actually much more southwesterly than what the models were predicting. So I don't know if that's maybe just a weird wind shift that happened, or maybe that has to do with the fire actually being powerful enough to start actually influencing the weather around the fire. That can happen sometimes, where when you have this much rising motion, that's going to definitely impact your wind patterns out there, because you have so much air now rushing in to take the place of the air that's rising. And we'll see if this camera is still here in about an hour, because it looks like that smoke plume is just coming directly towards this camera and rotating as it goes. So, fire to the north, that's the part of the fire that is burning up basically where there's not as many structures. Those orange dots represent where the structures are. And then it's the southern edge of the fire that actually looks to be more active now. That's what I just showed in this video right here. And that's also where they seem to be focusing all of their resources right now. When it comes to those resources, zooming in over here, in just one day, they've been able to mobilize more than 1,000 personnel to this fire. 41 dozers, 153 engines, and I'm sure every time we refresh this page, those numbers probably go up. And then when we look at the Watch Duty app, that is the most aircraft I have ever seen across a fire. And let's see where these air tankers are going. So it does look like there's still a big cluster focused on this very southern edge. Let's try to figure out where they've been going. That's a good indication of where the fire seems to be. Yeah, it seems like they're a bit more spread out now. I see somebody saying stay online for 16 hours like Catherine does. Unfortunately, I have work at 3 a.m. tomorrow morning, and I had work at 3 a.m. this morning, so I can actually already starting to feel my voice go. But I mean, this is probably this might be the most serious wildfire situation that I've seen in 5 years of wildfire forecasting. I mean, I forecasted the Caldor fire, where it was going right up towards South Lake Tahoe. That one was maybe my previous sketchiest situation. And then they were actually able to steer the fire around those communities. I just don't know how well they're going to be able to do any steering on this fire. Just, I mean, if you look at how much power is coming off of this fire, this doesn't seem like one of those ones that you're able to steer. This is basically one of those ones that you just want to get out of the way of. Because it's just, as we've talked about, it's the perfect confluence of just every factor that you could have. Some topography going on here, but more so the fuels that are about as dry as you're ever going to see them this time of the year, haven't burned in decades. And then that weather forecast. I would say, yeah, it's hot, it's dry. I mean, look at the temperatures, 100. Relative humidity, that one shows 11%. That's about as hot as dry as you're ever going to see a fire. But usually when you have temperatures that hot, you don't usually have your winds that strong, because usually when your temperature is that hot, it means there's just a big dome, a heat dome sitting over California, and we actually usually have calm winds during a heat wave. Whereas in this case, you're checking all three boxes, where it's hot, it's dry, and you have those winds. And I think the key part about the winds, we were looking at this earlier, is that they're not dying down. A lot of times your peak fire activity will be around 2 to 5 p.m. in the afternoon, and then your winds start to die down as you get into the evening, and then the fire calms down. But this fire grew 45,000 acres last night. Like, when I checked the fires yesterday at about 1 to 2 p.m., I was thinking about whether I should do like another update video, and nothing really looked like it was popping off too much. And then we look at the Watch Duty app here. It says that it started at 2:55 yesterday, and then overnight was actually where we saw the most growth. Like yesterday evening, I believe it was still around 1,500 acres. And then when I woke up this morning, again, 3 a.m. for my morning shift, it was already at 45,000 acres. And that's overnight growth. And the reason that that was able to happen, along with the fact that we have very dry fuels out there that are abundant because they haven't burnt in a very long time, but it was because we had a southerly wind blowing around 20 to 25 miles per hour consistently overnight that was able to just rapidly push this fire up towards the north. And I just want to measure it again for anybody who's new to the live stream. If you measure this from tip to tail, that fire moved 20 miles in one day. I've never heard of that happening on a fire before. And I mean, if anybody has a lot of experience in wildfire and you've seen something more than that, let me know what fire that would be. Because I think the previous record I'd seen was the Dixie fire going 15 miles in one day. And this has now gone 20, and if we look at the active heat detections, it's still going. And when we look at the wind forecast, it's remaining windy overnight tonight. So clicking in here, there's Chico, there's Paradise. That's maybe roughly where the fire is. At 11 p.m. tonight, it's still showing some gusts around 28 miles per hour. And then at 2 a.m., still above 25 miles per hour. So if you just think about what happened last night when we had these kinds of conditions, it went 50,000 acres. I mean, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't go another 50,000 acres tonight, and perhaps even more, just because we're seeing so much. It's at a much larger starting point right now. Whereas last night it was starting at 1,500 acres, so it had to build up steam. Whereas at this point, look at how much heat is coming off of this fire. It's got about as much steam as you could ever see on a wildfire. Now, it does look like the western side has calmed down significantly. And, if we need some silver linings here, if you're in the Chico area, this fire is moving away from you. And now you actually have this barrier of fuels that have been burnt out between the active part of the fire and your thousands of structures there. And the wind looks to remain mostly southerly as we move forward. So if I had to predict the directions that this is going to move as we go forward, based on the weather forecast, it looks like the winds remain, they shift around a little bit towards southwesterly to southeasterly, but it does seem like it's overall southerly. So this northern side is definitely going to continue up towards the north like that, especially into all these fuels that haven't burnt in a very long time. And then this side right here, I mean, you can look at the direction that the wind is blowing right now. Seems like that's just going to continue to burn up towards the northeast right there. And then you look at this western side, look how it flares up a little bit right there, but then watch what happens more recently. It starts to die back down again on the west, and it even almost seems like the northern side is losing a little bit of steam. So, it's hard to say that. That's still a lot of heat coming off of the fire right there. It definitely does look like the southeastern side is the most active though. And, oh yeah, somebody asking about this website. This is College of DuPage Weather. It's my favorite site to look at. Alright, so just coming back to watch duty. Oh, they just updated the acreage again. So they're doing some consistent flights to keep us updated with the numbers here. That's now at 125,000 acres. So that was about a 5,000 acre jump in, I don't know, I think I last checked that about 30 minutes ago. So Cole says, yeah, let's just read this update because this was 3 minutes ago, so this is going to be some new information for us. The fire has now been mapped at 125,000 acres by Firis. Their latest perimeter can be viewed on the watch duty map. Air Attack reporting the fire is pushing up canyon along Big Chico Creek. Another 50 additional engines have been requested into Forest Ranch. So, let's see if fire is pushing up canyon along Big Chico Creek. I wonder if we can zoom in on this map. Wonder if this is Big Chico Creek. Yeah, I thought that's what we were looking at right here. So basically the watch duty app right here. Just want to show you what I'm thinking here. Air Attack reporting the fire is pushing up canyon along Big Chico Creek. And then if we come to our map, there's our camera. There's this canyon right here. And then you see Big Chico Creek right there. So let's take the wide view to figure out where it is that we're looking at. So you have Chico down here. You have Paradise here. And then let's see if we can see 32 on this map. So 32 seems to be on the, I believe that would be the ridge around Big Chico Creek. And then you have Forest Ranch right there. So, and then that's Cohasset Ridge. Again, hopefully saying that correctly. And let's see. Alright, so I think we've kind of got our bearings here. Watch duty says it's going up Big Chico Creek. Now let's zoom in here and let's click on the last 3 hours. It's going to take a second. So that ridge right there, where you see that smoke, that's probably about 2 hours ago. Based on show on map. Yeah, this is actually the best map to work off of. So that ridge that we're just looking at is the Musty Buck Ridge, is where you're going to see the smoke plume at the beginning of this video. So that's right there. And then Big Chico Creek is going to be down in this drainage in here. So the camera is about to shift direction, and that's what we're looking at right there. So that's the fire basically ripping up that canyon that we're looking at on this map right here. Zooming in, seems like we have forest ranch right there. And that kind of rotating smoke plume that we're looking at is basically going right up through there at the moment. So I could even draw on there. Basically, looks like it's almost rotating as it goes up Big Chico Creek. So we've kind of got a good idea of where the most active part of the fire appears to be right now. Let's see if we could do that somewhere else. So Doe Mill Road, 3 hours. Alright, looks like this is going to be maybe, I wonder if this is just the exact same portion of the fire, just from a more southerly angle. It seems like it would be, because it seems like we have that same rotating column that we're looking at from the different angle. So let's go show on map. Yeah, so now that's going to be Forest Ranch up here. And we're going to be looking up past 32. And then there's Big Chico Creek. I wonder if it comes all the way down through here. So yeah, that's basically, we're looking at the same thing from two different angles. That first one that we looked at is when the fire's coming up Big Chico Creek. And then the second one is going to be looking at it from behind, moving up that drainage. Oh, so that maybe also explains the wind. And that also explains why it's moving the direction that it's going. It's because the winds are going up this canyon. So that was something that we were a bit confused about before, because the weather forecast was saying it was just supposed to be southerly winds, which would try to push this fire and the smoke straight to the north. But then you look at the direction that the smoke is actually going, and it actually looks like it's going much more to the northeast, which means the fire is going much more to the northeast. But what it seems like is happening is you get up canyon winds in the afternoons, and that's oriented a lot more kind of northeast. So as the fire moves up towards the northeast, that's basically just following those up canyon winds. I'll maybe draw that. I think it would be better. So the weather forecast was saying our winds were going to be straight north, and the fire would be moving straight north. But if you look at Big Chico Creek, it's a bit more northwesterly, and so is the canyon. So when you get those up canyon winds going like that, that basically just explains why the fire is moving the direction that it is right now, and why it's maybe going against the weather forecast that we were looking at earlier. So now, with that kind of figured out, let's look at it from the more southeasterly angle again. So Doe Mill Road, let's go 3 hours. You're going to see it. So this would be looking over 32 at this point, going up the canyon and rotating as it goes up. And then if we want to tie it, so, it looks like it's, obviously less active behind that rotating camera, or that rotating plume, because at that point the smoke has been, or the fuels have been cleared out. And then if we now take a look at it from that northern angle again, and just trying to pinpoint exactly where it is, it's going to be our Platte Mountain camera, showing the map. Now looking down, and then we'll kind of move on to something else after this, but I just want to tie this whole thought together. So here's our canyon. Now we're looking down the canyon. Doesn't look like the trees are definitely moving, but it's just that consistent steady wind of around 30 to 35 miles per hour. And now you see that rotating plume coming up the canyon almost directly towards this camera. We'll see how much longer this camera is actually able to last. So it's been about another been about another 30 minutes, so maybe it's a good time to kind of update everybody who might be new to the live stream based on some of the information that we've been able to gather. So let's zoom out here. Maybe do a quick sip of water. Alrighty, so if you are new to the live stream, we're just going to do a quick summary on the park fire. So it started at about 2:55 yesterday afternoon, and then yesterday evening it was around 1,500 acres. Then it rapidly grew overnight. We had warm and dry conditions overnight, but the biggest thing is we had a strong southerly wind, which quickly pushed this fire up towards the north, and it actually grew more than 15 miles overnight, around 45,000 acres, and then it's continued to grow throughout the day today. The most recent numbers that we have to go off of, 125,000 acres, 3% containment. There are a large number of evacuation orders and warnings in place right now, so if you are anywhere on this watch duty app that's shown in the red, you can now actually see it looks like it's continued to extend farther towards the north now. If you're in the red, that means leave immediately. If you're in the yellow, that means it's an evacuation warning, get ready to leave. And maybe towards the start of the summary, I should also just kind of show you where this fire is. Zooming out a bit. Kind of hard to tell on this map. We'll actually go to this one then. So here's Chico. Here's Paradise. What I believe we've been able to figure out is that cluster of structures is Cohasset. Probably still saying that wrong. And then right here, that cluster of structures is going to be, it's actually easier to see on this map right here. That's going to be Forest Ranch. So looking at those three, Chico, Paradise, Forest Ranch, Cohasset. I would say the one that I'm the most concerned about right now is maybe Cohasset. I should probably just stop saying that because I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. But, you know, if we look at here, we know that the fire is just ripping along Big Chico Creek right now. And it seems like a lot of those structures are actually going to be on the western side of the ridge. And then you have Forest Ranch on the eastern side of the ridge. So right now, the fire might actually just be doing a perfect split between where we have the largest cluster of structures and hopefully leaving those structures unharmed. But it seems like what the fire is doing right now is just ripping up this canyon right here along Big Chico Creek. And hopefully it's leaving all of those structures untouched, but I mean, there are some pretty big concerns. We've been looking at some of the live camera imagery of this. You can see this rotating smoke plume. You can also see that it does look like parts of the fire are on that eastern side of the ridge. So it's hard to say that anything... It's hard to just see what's been happening on the eastern side of that ridge. But it's definitely in this canyon along Big Chico Creek where the fire looks to be the most active right now, even rotating at some points. Now, where we see the most aircraft appears to be on the southern edge of this fire. And let's try to see where they've been doing some of their recent drops. So now, looks like they're starting to focus a bit more right here. When we looked at this 30 minutes ago, they were focused all down on the southern edge of the fire, I believe trying to keep it on the western side of 32. Right there. Okay, so now this is going to be the more recent fire perimeter. So I'm glad that I stayed on the live stream because we just got the new fire perimeter data in. So that's why the acreage went up to 125,000 acres. looking at 32. It still looks like it just bumps up right against 32. Somebody in the live chat was saying, oh, and hey, it didn't crash. All right. I thought it crashed for a second there. Yeah, somebody in the live chat was saying that it did slop over 32 at one point. They did 2 retardant drops on it. And then we're seeing them focus a lot on this western side of 32 ever since then. You can actually see they are still doing that. Basically seems like there's 32 right there. Maybe that's where it slopped over. But then now they're trying to keep it on that western edge. Now the other thing that we're seeing, based on some of our camera imagery, I wonder if that is that rotating plume that we've been looking at in all the different cameras going up right there. I really wish that I could turn the evacuations off because it's really hard to see underneath it. Oh, actually, it worked. All right, Forest Ranch right there. You see that finger coming out? That's the part of the fire that we've been tracking for about the last 30 minutes. That's the part looking show on the map. So we're going to look at this camera right here. That's Platte Mountain. And then we have Big Chico Creek right here. It's in this canyon. Basically what's happening is instead of the weather forecast showed where we were supposed to have just southerly winds, now the fire is aligned in this canyon. It's been going up this canyon because during the afternoons, winds like to go up canyon, so it's basically been pushing the fire up here. And then that, imagine this finger right here extending in this part of the map right here. So you have Forest Ranch to the east of that, and then Cohasset to the west of it. And we were seeing some smoke and smoke plumes on the top of this ridge that looks like it's called Musty Buck Ridge. But it looks like the most active part is actually just directly on Big Chico Creek right now. So keep that map in mind, that little canyon right there, and then your up canyon winds that are going to be going directly that direction. Now we can match that up with that finger right there, where you can see Forest Ranch on that map. Looks like it's still to the east. And then Deer Creek Highway. I was trying to see, we can zoom actually way in. There's 32 right there. Looks like it just is bumping right up against 32. And then here's Forest Ranch in here. So that's where you can actually see some structures on this map, some of our streets in here as well. And right now, it looks like the fire perimeter is still staying to the west of where a lot of those roads are. So there's that finger, there's Forest Ranch. Here's the canyon, here's Forest Ranch, and then now let's actually see what that looks like. So 3 hours, that's that other ridge that we're looking at with Cohasset on the other side of it. And then pretty soon you're going to see those up canyon winds take this fire and basically put it directly up that creek that we're looking at. And then Forest Ranch is going to be on the basically the other side of that ridge, just outside of where that fire perimeter is. So, I mean, this is about as close of a call as you could possibly have. But based on the imagery that we have to go off of, so we have fire perimeters only. I'm still waiting for this perimeter to update. Let's actually see if it does update if I re-click it. No, it didn't. Seems like this website's a little bit farther behind. So basically, if we were to take the watch duty perimeter and try to picture it on this other perimeter, seems like basically that little finger of the fire is now extending up right around here. And what I'm kind of hoping happens is that it just stays in the canyon and is able to go between Cohasset and Forest Ranch and leave those structures, basically just carve a path through there. They maybe drop a bunch of retardant around both sides of this, steer it through there, and then, once it gets up into here, you do still have some structures, but not nearly as many. And I would say that's probably the best outcome that we could hope for at this point. And it would be amazing if they could do that, just based on the fact that we're checking every single box for this fire being as dangerous, as active as it possibly could be. We have fuels that, when we look here on the CalTopo fire history, there's no fire history in this area. Those fuels have been there for decades, just growing in. I mean, when you look on the camera, that fuel looks about as dense as you could possibly see. And then topography, obviously also coming into play here, because the canyon is funneling those winds and funneling the fire up the canyon. And then weather, we looked at that as well. Triple digits, winds 20 to 25 miles per hour, relative humidity in the teens, about as dry, hot, dry, and windy, checking all the boxes there. So if they were able to just steer this fire through all of these structures, that would be a pretty amazing feat. But I mean, when we look at a lot of the resources here, let's see. So resources still showing over 1,000 personnel, 153 engines, and then not sure why this popped up. Here we go. Alright, I'm actually going to close out of this window just so that doesn't happen again. So I was just going to point out lots of resources. The next thing I was going to point out is just all of this aircraft that we have on the southeastern edge of the fire right here. So they've been focusing, it seems like, keeping this fire from crossing 32 on the southeast, which I'd imagine a big part of the reason they're focusing right there, because when we look at all the structures, let's turn off fire history, that we have to the southeast, that's thousands of structures down there. And if we turn fire history back on, actually looks like we have some decent fire history in here. So, I mean, campfire was in 2018. So that cleared out a lot of fuel. So that's recent enough that anywhere that had the campfire is going to have much less fire activity for, that was 2018. Probably could say another 5 to 7 years before a lot of that fuel has grown back. So that's actually going to work in our favor now. But there is still definitely a good amount of fuel in here that hasn't burned in a very long time. So they're focusing a lot of aircraft on this southeastern edge of the fire for good reason. We have a lot of structures down to the southeast, and I mean, based on the wet winter we had, there's plenty of fuel that has grown just this last winter. And then we've been exceptionally hot. We had that heat wave at the beginning of July, and then we have above average temperatures the last few days. Seems like every time I check the Central Valley's forecast, they're in the triple digits. So that's dried out a lot of the grasses that grew with the wet winter that we had. And then you look at some of these cameras, there is just dense fuel all around this area. So that's the southern edge of the fire. Evacuation orders in place. some evacuation warnings actually seem like they're now stretching into paradise. But as of the most recent fire perimeter, it seems like it's still holding on the western edge of 32. And then right here is the most active part of the fire that we've been able to look at. And that's the part that seems to be going directly between Cohasset and Forest Ranch here. And looking at those structures, it's going to be all those structures on the western side right there, all the structures on the eastern side right there. There's Forest Ranch, there's Cohasset. And this map hasn't updated yet, but once it does update, you're going to see a little finger stretching up the canyon. So we can actually just check that out. Again, coming in here, Forest Ranch, there's the canyon. Big Chico Creek, that was something that we learned from Watch Duty. They basically said it's making a push up Big Chico Creek right there. And then we can actually look at that. I'll let the last 3 hours play right here, and then I'll take a quick sip of water. So you're going to start to see that rotate. Basically just shows how much power this fire has right now. And if we look at, now I haven't done this in a while, but I do want to just see what the all Modus and Veers is showing. Alright, so Modus and Veers kind of is showing that split in the fire as well, where it seems like there's a northern half of the fire and then a southern half of the fire. Not seeing as many of the recent heat directions or detections right around Cohasset. Coming in here, you can actually see that better, where earlier in the day, it was just ripping up towards the north, those southerly winds pushing the fire north. And then more recently, the fire almost seems to split in two. Half of it goes off into the north, where not as many structures up here, and then the southern edge of the fire becomes a lot more active. And at the very end of this loop, you'll notice there's a lot more smoke coming off of this southeastern edge of the fire, and especially in the last hour or two. So that's going to be that part of the fire. And if we look at the current satellite, this is going to overestimate because it's going to be picking up on some of the heat in the smoke plume. But maybe it's picking up on that little finger that is stretching up Big Chico Creek right now. And then certainly still seeing a lot of heat on the northern side, but you notice not as many of those orange dots on the north. So, and that's, again, over-exaggerating, so I'm going to just turn that off. So I think we've gotten a pretty good idea of what's going on at this point. Just taking off right there, but I hate to say it, but I can feel my brain power starting to go out. Like I said, I've been awake since 3 in the morning, had the morning shift today, and have pretty much been talking and following this fire all day long today. So I think this is where I'm going to have to wrap it up. I also have to wake up at 3 a.m. tomorrow morning again for work. But I guarantee you, and I promise you, that I will do an update and forecast video tomorrow morning, first chance that I get. And yeah, I just wish everybody luck on this fire, especially if you're local. Definitely keep you in my thoughts and prayers out there. This looks like quite an active fire. At least it does look like maybe the most active part of the fire that we're worried about right now does seem to be going between where we have the largest amount of structures, and hopefully it stays that way. That'll definitely be the thing that I check first thing when I wake up tomorrow morning, and I'll keep you guys posted on any information that I find. So last thing that I'm going to say, probably is the first thing I said, I'll make it the last thing as well, is always to just stay updated on the evacuation orders and warnings. It's kind of hard to click on the park fire right now just because there's so many aircraft all around the southern edge of the fire. But you can also find those on the CAL FIRE website and a bunch of other sources as well. So yeah, good luck to all the locals out there. I'll have more details tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, thoughts and prayers to anybody who's been impacted by this fire.